Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second OpenNTF webinar for this month. So we had a glut of topics. We wanted to start getting things through faster than could happen, 12 in a year. So we're adding these up. This one was admittedly an odd start because this is what would normally be the August cozy developer webinar while all of Europe is on vacation. But we realized we had like 50 admin ones in a row, and so we should probably break it up a little bit. And so we're doing this one now. And so welcome everybody. The topic here will be it's a developer variety hour, and we'll go into what that means as we get there. But before I begin, so I'll just say the agenda is presentation. It's first this little welcome, presentation of me and pals. We have our panelists here. We'll introduce as we get to it, and then at the end Q&A. So as usual, you can feel free to ask questions at any time. If we feel like answering them at the time, we can, but usually we wait till the end and then we answer all the questions there. That gives a lot of time for things to come in and people ask it. Hopefully we'll remember the context. And as always, we want to thank the OpenNTF sponsors. So, HCL has contributed and has helped the organization. Basically, all the stuff we do, from webinars to everything other than running the servers, which is problematic, is thanks to HCL. So we keep everything going. Some of these things like Discord isn't expensive, but we pay a little to keep things nice over there. And that's all thanks to them. And similarly, Prominic hosts our servers and runs them and handles, load balancing and keeping things up and maintaining all of those. And that can get at times complicated. So if you remember from the AGM, we talked about the server switchover, which was a complicated process with a lot of steps, and they were there the whole time and helping us along the way. So that went smoothly thanks to them. And they've been doing this for years, and it saves us a lot of money. And I'll kind of be going into this a little more. So usually this is when I'm doing these things, give my spiel about like, oh, we definitely want you to contribute, which we do. But I kind of have some more detail during the presentation. So I will kind of skip over this one for now. And you can, as always, join us on Discord, which here's our QR code. We'll have the URL for this later in the presentation. So the Discord community is actually pretty active, like very pleasantly active, and there's a lot of people in there all the time. It's going very nicely, and I quite enjoy it. And so if you're not on there currently, I heartily encourage you to join. Now for our upcoming events, and for some reason I split this into two slides. We have our OpenNTF Hangout next week. So this is what was originally the Repair Cafe, but we felt like that kind of like constrained a little too much. Really, this is just be on Discord and be chatting, and if you have a question for the people who are there, it'll be me and at least a couple board members and other people from the community. Feel free to ask or just bring up topics and whatever, or just listen in. It's kind of, these were inspired originally by some of the end of year hangouts we did in December, and then those went nicely. And so we want to keep these things going. And then here's what probably should have been on the previous slide. Our next webinar will be the one that was originally scheduled for this week, but we wanted to split things up. So next month will be admin best practices with Kim. And so we'll have, there'll be more details of that when the invitations go out. So that one, I've heard a little bit about it. It looks very interesting. So we hope you will join us for that. And like last week, I still have not updated the Q&A panel. But this is roughly what it looks like. It probably looks black now instead of white. But otherwise, you can ask your questions in there. They'll go to at least me. I forget if the panelists can see them by default. But at the end, I will read them out and we will answer them there. So feel free to queue them up at any time while it's top of mind, and then they will remain there and we'll be able to see them. And also, as always, we try to keep things to the topic. Admittedly, this is going to be a very broad webinar, so there's going to be a lot of stuff covered. But we always say, like, you don't have to ask if it's recorded. Yes, it's being recorded. Also, you can't ask about like when is the next Domino version coming out. We don't know, and even if we did, we couldn't say. So we can't talk about HCL products, future stuff. So about the stuff in the presentation. And if you do have an unrelated question, please join us in Discord, and there you can ask pretty much anything. There you can ask when the next version is coming out, and people will probably say it's not announced, but you can ask it. All right, time for a presentation. So I have dubbed this the Developer Variety Hour. So this is meant to be kind of a casual collection of different topics related to development. I'm going to start out by talking about some more specifics about ways to get involved and a kind of a gentle nudge for that sort of thing. And then we're going to have our three panelists who will talk about the projects of theirs. And then after that, I have a collection of updates and discussions about little topics. And at the end, little projects, projects of varying scale. And then at the end, we'll do our Q&A. So to start with, this is me, Jesse Gallagher. I'm the CTO, and I know some guys, a consulting company. I am the IP manager at OpenNTF. I blog at frostilic.us, and I am available on ActivityPub at jesse@pub.frostilic.us. So our agenda, open source involvement. And we have then three guests. So we have Karsten here to talk about the Domino JNX project. He recently added virtual views, which look very interesting, and so I figured I'd snag him for this. Then we have Paul to talk about Bali Unit, which is likely the only time that there will be positive reference to LotusScript in a presentation I'm running ever. So be happy you're here to see that. And then we have Alec from the Drappy team. He will be talking about the Drappy Node.js and Go SDKs. Following that is going to be me. I'll be talking about a couple of projects that are up on GitHub. So there's Domino JNX, which is related to JNA, and it's kind of the foundational access layer of Drappy. I'll be talking about an example Domino Rust add-in that I made and put up there. That was an interesting little project. And then because I can't go 5 minutes without talking about it, I will mention the XPages Jakarta EE project again, kind of the updates that I've had to that. And then I wanted to point out HCL's open source NTFs at the end. That was a long, I mean, to me, long overdue, but very, very pleasant move that they officially open sourced a lot of the NTFs, not necessarily updating them. I mean, there's the Lotus Smart Suite is on there, so that's probably not going to get a massive revamp anytime soon, but it is Apache licensed. And then at the end will be the Q&A. So I wanted to start out by talking about open source involvement. So this is where I normally have my slide in the get involved thing, just saying, hey, we really want you to. I wanted to go into a little more depth here. Basically, one of the things we talk about at OpenNTF board meetings is getting people more involved, and a lot of that is lowering the barriers, making things less onerous, less intimidating. And one of the ways that we want to do that is just by pointing out that almost anything helps. I mean, in theory, you could be a jerk, but we don't really have a lot of jerks in Discord, so it's unlikely that that will happen. So, you know, obviously the easy one that people think, well, the big one that people think of is code contributions, like making a new project, contributing actual code, but that's only one of the things. You can do documentation contribution. This is something where, you know, I know I and presumably a lot of other developers fall prey to this, where we write what we could charitably call developer documentation, which is, if you know, basically it's written from the perspective of knowing absolutely everything there is to know about the project already, which means you're probably going to have some holes in it. And so one of the best ways that somebody can help is if you have used the project a little or a lot, but you are not the main developer, your documentation will likely be better than the stuff that the main developer wrote. This is one I should mention. If English isn't your first language, that's fine. Like, you can just, any documentation is there and language can be tweaked, but like going from zero to anything is great. And this is very, very important. And, you know, it's something I neglect to do in other cases. And, you know, it's always very, very welcome. It's huge. Almost everything is underdocumented, so anything here helps. But even without actually contributing anything you wrote, like just adding an issue. So in a lot of my projects, this comes up where somebody will be trying to do something that I never tried. And so I don't know if it works. And so either they'll ask, does this work? Or they'll try it and it won't work, and they'll say, hey, this doesn't work. Can you look into this? And then, you know, obviously the more detail, the better. But even just knowing that it was something to do is itself very helpful. Every once in a while, it'll be something where it's like, well, the project's not supposed to do that, but then that kind of becomes an implicit feature request. So really, any participation of that kind helps. You can also potentially answer issues. So if you happen to be looking at an issue list or question in Discord, and somebody says, "Hey, is this a bug? What is this?" If you know, even if you're not the main developer, chime in. That's very useful. Like just having that going there, it's helpful for the developer because it may be something that it's like, oh, I forgot to answer that, so it's good that someone else did. Or it's also good to just have more community around something. Similarly, along those lines, Discord chat. I have a screenshot here of these specific projects, what Discord calls a forum style channel. And so in there, we have sub-channels for various specific projects. And so the goal there is if you want to talk about the XPages SDK or Domino JNX, we have a number of others like for ODA and things like that. It's in a more organized place. And Discord, one of the nice things about their UI is that when you post in there, it becomes that subtopic becomes visible on the left for a certain amount of time. And so even if you have a very old project that nobody's talked about it for months and months, you can dredge it back up and it will show up and people will be likely to answer your questions. I quite like these. I like them a lot better than threads. So this is a great place to discuss those things. And if you don't see one, I forget if people other than me can make new entries in here. If you can't, you can always request that one of the board members create a new topic there for an existing project. Another great way is blog posts. I mean, I know blogs are not as popular as they used to be, but I still love them. They're wonderful. And blog posts about anything, about something you ran into, something you're trying out, saying like, hey, I decided to use this project and here's my experience with it, is wonderful. I know that one of the things that can always be intimidating about that is that you feel like, oh, I'm not using it right, or I don't know everything about it, and so people are going to be mad that I didn't do X, Y, or Z correctly. Don't worry. I mean, if you didn't do it right, it's probably because the documentation was terrible. So that's room for updates on the documentation. And even if you're going about it in an odd way, like that's something that's information that's useful. And then maybe you find a better way to do it. So those are very, very, very welcome. Collaboration today is ongoing. We have these things where hopefully eventually when there's a new OpenNTF website, they'll show up there too. Like community involvement is delightful. And then last one is videos. So obviously the eternal classic is Notes in 9. Then there's also like the C3UG ones that happen periodically. Like any of those, any videos you can make, just even if it's just you and a screen share, and you're sitting there and say, okay, I'm going to record me writing this kind of Java class in Designer or whatever. Yeah, go for it. I mean, those little things are very helpful. They're like blog posts. They don't have to be a big deal. Admittedly, I do far fewer of these than I intend to, but it's, we all have our hang-ups about what we want to do and don't get around to doing. Now, some of the ways that you can participate at OpenNTF specifically is that you can post a snippet. So this is one of the easiest ways for you to just post a little bit of code that doesn't have the full trappings of a project, that has releases and documentation and all that. So if you go to openntf.org, there's a snippets link at the top, and you can just go there and say, hey, in the classic XPages days, these were things like, here's how to do a redirect scope sort of thing. Here's how to do a phase listener. Here's how to do a custom validator or whatever. Just like little bits, things that fit in there that aren't, a project on their own. You wouldn't necessarily want to have a full project to show how to do a custom validator. But snippets are great. They are also not just for developers. There are admin snippets in there. They can either be scripts or just like little details about how to do things. So this is very, very lightweight. If you just have a neat little bit of code that either is the sort of thing that you made and you think will be very useful to others, or it's the sort of thing that you tried to look for, couldn't find, and then had to write yourself, and so put it there for future you, for other people with the same problem. It's a nice way to do it. You can, of course, create a full project. These don't have to be huge. Like we do have some larger projects, but we also have projects that are intended to be one upload and you're done, but it was more than a snippet. Sometimes we have some that are just like, hey, here's a larger example of how to do this kind of app. You're not necessarily on the hook for maintaining a project for decades if you post it there. You can if you want to, but we want to make it so that it's inviting. This is also a process we want to smooth out a little bit, because right now we have these sending an email to do the CLA and all that sort of thing. We want to smooth that out. We still want a CLA, but we want to make that easier. You can also post on a project page. Admittedly, we are aware that these tabs sometimes break. That'll be fixed eventually. But here you can post feature requests, defects, discussions, reviews. It's a little bit, I always find it a little more fine-grained than it needs to be, but discussions and defects are always very helpful. And just having that sort of thing going on, it's very good. And again, I keep hammering this one, join Discord. It's active and friendly and good. And the more people there, the better. I mean, I guess there's an upper limit, but the upper limit is larger than our community, so it's definitely a good place to be. And I want to talk a little about participating on GitHub. So more and more, for better and for worse, GitHub is kind of just the path of least resistance, and for good reason. It's good. It's a good site. Getting a little worse recently, but it's a good site. And it's a great place to upload any of your code, because you can just have your own name or your own organization and put your code up there. You can also fork an existing project and make a PR with your changes. I'll be going a little bit into this. That's kind of the collaborative and social way that you can use GitHub, that you have these ways of working with other people's code in a lightweight way without, you don't necessarily like have to sign a whole agreement with them or be at their company or whatever. Like, you can do these things, and larger projects will have rules, but it's meant to be this sort of thing where you kind of do this loose, and then you tinker around with it, and then if you have something good, you can send it back. You can go there and you can post and reply to issues. So as I mentioned, with either in Discord or on the discussions page on OpenNTF, it's great to just, if you have an issue with a project and it has a GitHub page, post your issue there. Or you could go and see, oh, somebody ran into the same thing I did. So either you could just say, hey, I also ran into this, and either just with that, or add your own details, or you could say, actually, this is how it's supposed to work, and that can be very, very helpful. I've had that happen, and it's great every single time. You can watch and star repositories. This is kind of just like social credit. It's nice. Watching is mostly for you, and stars, seeing the number go up is good. But it also, it's just pleasant. Sometimes you just want to do things that are nice for other people, and this is a good way to do it. And along those lines, on individual developer pages, you can follow or sponsor individual developers, at least those that have set up the sponsoring. That can be a nice way to say, hey, I like what you're doing, keep doing what you're doing. Here's a little bit of money, here's a lot of money, however you want to do it. That could be a nice way to just, in a non-full-on contract way. So it's basic, GitHub sponsors are essentially the same thing as Patreon. It's the same idea, but it's mostly about like, hey, I want you to just keep working on your projects. Give enough money, you can make them do specific things. But in general, it's just a nice way of saying, hey, I like what you're doing, and I want you to be able to keep doing it. So forking and pull requests. I'm going to mention this one specifically because this is kind of the bread and butter of how you work with GitHub, but it's also very, very intimidating at first. But I want to boil it down a little bit. So you go to a repository. So here I went to the OpenNTF homepage repository, and I clicked the fork button, and you get a nice little screen that says fork it where, and you can have it in your own name or an organization. And then you have your own copy of this repository. At that point, you're free to do whatever the heck you want with it. You can modify it, you can change it completely, you can do barely a few things, but the kind of best case scenario, either you just fork it and make something awesome your own out of it, or you're trying to do some improvements, you fork it to your side, then you make your little change, say, okay, this works out nicely, this is the kind of thing I wanted to do now, and then you can make a pull request. So this is something where you go and say, hey, there's a nice contribute button. You can say, I have added a couple of things. I want to open this pull request to send it back to the main developer. And then that ends up on their side saying, so-and-so has made a pull request. Here's a summary of their changes. Here's a list of, you can have your discussion there. GitHub is a nice UI for managing all this stuff. And it's very, very nice. Again, I will admit it's very intimidating. Like, I have contributed to larger projects, and I sweat every step of it, going through and saying, oh, well, guys, am I following all the rules? Am I, is my code good? Is my indentation right? Are they going to yell at me? Probably not. They're probably not going to yell at you. It's probably fine. Worst case, they'll say, we don't really like it. But most of the time, people want pull requests. I want pull requests. The projects I've contributed have wanted pull requests. And, the absolute best is that you find a weird bug, you track it down, fix it, make a PR. That's amazing. But even if it's just, little things like I fixed the documentation, I found a typo, that's wonderful. And especially once you do it a couple times, you start getting a little more comfortable with it, and you get used to like looking, for example, a lot of projects have a file like contributing.md or something in the README about here's what you're supposed to do. So for example, for OpenNTF and Eclipse and other larger organizations, there's a contributor license agreement you have to sign. Sometimes they'll also have automatic build actions, which is a nice net. So like, for example, in the Domino JNX project, every pull request gets built to make sure that it works, or at least it builds. And so, that's the sort of thing where it's easy to accidentally do something that would break the build. This lets the developers know. So the more coordinated the project, the more sophisticated it is, the more little stuff you get there. And I wanted to mention, and because YouTube URLs are terrible, I just suggest searching OpenNTF GitHub on YouTube. So Paul and I, a couple of years ago, did a presentation on all of this stuff, and it still holds up. So I would recommend going and checking that out. And it's a good summary of just using Git and GitHub and different ways and the process of pull requests and all this. And again, I know it's intimidating and it's unnatural sometimes, but it's very good, and almost all the time, the people you're contributing to want your contributions, and they are friendly, and they want to hear from you. That goes for me. That goes for everybody on this call. So yeah, it's good, even though it can be terrifying. And along those lines, I do want to have a special nod for HCL and documentation. So one of the things that HCL has been doing with open source, they have a number of open source things, but one of them has been making a lot of their product documentation open source on GitHub. And they are very receptive to fixes and improvement pull requests. So some of these can be simple, like you find some incorrect grammar or a typo, some weird formatting, like the headers don't look right, you can fix that. Sometimes you'll see something that's outdated, like, it mentions classic Mac OS, and it probably should mention the one that's been the recent version for 25 years. You can fix those little things. I do want to mention, though, that you should still feel free to bug HCL to actually do the larger fixes. Like, just because it's open source doesn't mean you have to do it, but it is a nice thing to do, and it helps the product, and it's often very easy, but it's also a really good way to kind of dip your toes in this. Even if you're not a full-on developer, even if you don't know this, like just looking at documentation, editing prose can often be a lot easier and more straightforward. And so it's a nice way to kind of get a good feel for it. If you find something that should be improved, wording is weird, something like that, this could be a good way to get in there and get used to this sort of thing. So at the end of this developer section, or the contribution section, I wanted to give a little nudge in that direction. So if you just go to their GitHub and search for docs, you'll find a lot of these. So that can be very helpful, both for the product documentation and for you as a way to do some practice. And so it's a nice kind of easy win if you find something you want changed. Now, with that behind us, I will start turning it over to our guests in turn to talk about various projects that they've worked on. So first up, I'm going to hand it over to Karsten, who's worked on the Domino JNX project. He recently made some interesting additions, and so Karsten, you can take it away.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so I released a new version of Domino JNX, I think last week, or maybe 2 versions with some bug fixes later on. After some time, I think almost 2 years without any updates, but I was working on that project, but hadn't released anything yet. Everything was in the develop branch. That's why the list of changes has grown and it's pretty long. Covers, for example, DQL, covers MIME, named docs, NSF properties, as you see, some security stuff, and a feature that I will now demo and explain in detail. It's called virtual views. In short, a Domino JNX is a project, if you don't know it, that gives you access to the C API of Domino. without knowing any C. So you can do all that development in Java and do it either as a standalone application or as an XPages application where you can access the Domino JNA class. So to get started, you just open the page on GitHub for the Domino JNA project, and in the releases section, you will find the latest versions. And there's a zip file for the OpenNTF for the OSGI plugins for the XPages extensibility API, and then that you can download and install in Domino Designer and in on the Domino server. This week I'm going to release another version, I think tomorrow or maybe today, because I just found a new bug when I built the demo I'm going to show you. And yeah, so that's how it goes. If you're really using your API, you find some issues and you fix it. I wrote a 3-part blog series the last week, I think, and this one covers the topic that caused me to build the virtual view API. The first article is about the pain of developing on Domino and trying to access data or to read data and search for data. The second one explores the available options. So as a starter, NSF search, this is something that the virtual views is based on. Next, we will show Domino views, of course. That's what you all know, and they are based on NSF search to find the relevant documents and to display them. Then, of course, folders, you know them, working similar to Domino views. And next, the new stuff like Domino query language and the query results processor. And the query results processor is a great tool developed primarily by John Curtis, but its main focus is not, I think, not for developers to build their apps with, but to create reports. So the data that you see in the query results processor views is a snapshot of your data. And what I'm going to show you is built on all that knowledge and all that history of API development. And the goal was to build something for developers to use in their applications, either as a replacement for the query results processor with more features, or even for the Domino views in your application. That's the third article where I explain the concept in detail with some code snippets and the feature list. What this feature is about, it is working similar to the query results processor, so it can do multi-DB lookups and it can access multiple databases. It reads the document summary information from those documents, and it reads and it structures them as views. So you have categories, you have sorted columns, everything you know. We have sums and averages in the API, but there's one thing that Domino views cannot do. We can compute the column values and not just in formula language, but in Java code as well. So that's the first difference. And then other things you might know. We have incremental view updates. That's something that a query results processor views do not have. So you have a live view of your data, even for multiple databases. We have we collect the reader's information from documents. So there's only one view, one virtual view instance on the server, and depending on the user that wants to read the data, we filter the data based on his usernames list and his access level on the original databases where the data comes from. So that's pretty powerful. We don't create views for every user, which are old as soon as you generate them, but we just create one giant index with all the data that gets updated on the fly. We have several data providers. Those can be extended, but we have a few standard implementations. For example, you can do the same as you know from Domino views. You can use a formula and just search a database like a selection formula. What we also have is we can scan folders for changes. So you pick all documents currently in the folder, and then you incrementally run C API calls and fetch the changes that happened since the last indexing. So we have a live view of folder content, but with a different categorization or column sorting. And we have an option to read design documents. So as NSF search is not just limited to data documents, you can search design and profile documents as well. So you can create a multiple database overview of your design and have a nice UI on top of it. This thing is very fast. So the funny thing is I worked with my demo today and I built the initial index and it took 5 seconds for 40,000 documents. On my Mac, it's 3 seconds. And it was slower on the Domino server working with the normal views. So this just pulls the data out of the NSFs and creates a structure in memory. So everything is stored in the Java heap. There's no I/O. It's all read from the memory. So it's very fast and fast to update. And we have full control. If we want to run an index update or if you want to block it until the reader is done, so you have exclusive access if you want to, without any indexing, modifying your data if you really need an important point in time. Yeah, so that's basically the feature. So let's get started with my small demo application. It's the first step, as I said, is download the zip file. The next step is to put it in a local folder. Then you go to Designer and you enable the Eclipse plugin install. Afterwards, you can access this install menu here, where you can search for new features. You pick your local version. So that's my downloaded release. And then you click finish and you get offered the install options and go through the licensing, and then you can restart Designer. And for Domino, you do something similar. So let's see, we have our server. And here I have an update site database where you can upload the release version. So the same code runs on server and in the designer. After a restart task HTTP, everything is working as expected, and you can start developing and see the results in the HTTP task. Yes, so my application is, nowadays it's very important to have several components. Everything must be animated. It must have a lot of colors to be a good demo, and you have to use AI for this purpose. So my demo looks like this. This is a sunburst diagram on the left and a categorized view on the right. AI, there's no AI in the application, but the AI helped me to build the application. So the sunburst stuff is from the D3.js website, and Claude, in that case, created some code on top of it so that I can now use it and pick some stuff like, to see everything is animated, like the continents that the companies of my fake names people are in. So I can click Africa. I see the next options. To the right, you see that the view reacts to the change. So I can pick I, and you see the everything with I. I can expand them. And everything you see has a response time of 50 milliseconds for each request, and everything is coming from the Java memory. So no view is involved here. So let's go back to the main area, and I can expand everything. And these are 40,000 users. So it's auto reloading on when you navigate to the end of the page. And so that's a pretty long list. Yeah, so there's a sample application which demonstrates how to expand everything, how to collapse everything. I can collect everything and expand single ones, Africa A, for example, and this one. Now I can navigate to a different country, go back to Africa, and it's still expanded. So this one is everything is using a REST API that I developed, where I pass this information from the front end, what you want to expand or collapse. And yeah, then you can see your data. So how does it work? I have two X pages. One is the X page with an X agent that has the view data in it. So there's not much code here. Nothing to see, only one call for my class. And in my Java class, I'm getting the request and primarily checking if the format is flat, so that it's for the on the right side for the categorized view. So the normal stuff, or if it's these three stats, which just reads the category structure of the view, no document information, and some things like the descendants count and so on. So those are two calls. And the data is then read from the virtual views. So the virtual views are created here, and it's a view created in code. There's no designer, but you may know the information here for the column information. So it's title for the column, programmatic name, information about if it's a category, if it's visible or not, about the sorting, if you have total information. So in that case, there's an average computation, the sum or none, and then you have the formula. Or you have a Java class. So in this case, the first column, the continent category, is not computed with formula, but it's computed in Java. So I read the company name from the fake names docs. I just want to show you the fake names database. Looks like this. So there is first name, last name, some basic name information, and then the company name. And I use get a string, get the company name, have a lookup table where I can look up the continent, and then return the continent or unknown if it's not in the table. So that's basically a join operation. It's on the fly creating the category based on some information. Could be a database lookup. In my case, it's a demo, so it's kind of fake. As you see here, that's my method that creates the continent map. Here as well, a virtual view that just reads the company name as category, a view navigator that I'm using. That's my own implementation here to read the first level of the view. And then I'm doing sophisticated analysis of the company name. I'm computing the hash code modulo 6, and depending on the hash code, it's which decides which continent it is. So just to have some data spread over these values. So that's how I'm creating this virtual view. I give it a name that I can use to load it afterwards. I give it a version number. in this case 17. If I'm using 18, the stored index gets replaced with a new one. So if you add columns, you should increase the version number. I can give it a duration, how long it's kept in memory, for 10 minutes in this case. After 10 minutes of not using it, it gets disposed, and in that case, it would take 5 seconds for the next request to rebuild it. And yeah, then the information about the columns, and next the DB searches, where I can give it a label. I can tell where the database is located. In this case, I'm combining data from 2 databases, and the selection formula. And yeah, here you have some other options as well, like folder entries, manual node IDs, profile docs, and so on. So lots of stuff to play with. And yeah, as I said, I have a view navigator. That's one is used to read the data from this virtual view. So the view navigator, maybe I can find that part. The view navigator gets the username, and in that case, this one is using, yeah, it's here. It's a session get effective name. And it's used to filter the entries so that you don't see everything, just what you are allowed to see. Yeah, and there's some other stuff like statistics and so on. Everything is documented in the code or in the blog entry. So yeah, I hope you have a lot of fun playing with it. Give me feedback, what's missing. And now I can just do a final demo. I'm picking Doty Williams so that you can see that this one is working live. Here is Doty Williams 2. Going back, and Williams 2. So this one, yeah, it's doing a request when I open the category and reloading that part of the view, and in that case it gets the fresh data. If a document moves between categories, everything is updated here, so it feels really great and very responsive. So Jesse, that was my demo. I'm giving back to you.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so I haven't had a chance to tinker with this yet, so I figured that's why I'd drag you on here, so I don't have to yet, but I will. And so yeah, that's very, very interesting. So thank you very much. Now, next up, we have Bali Unit. So this is meant for testing your LotusScript, and Paul will talk about this. It is, again, actually good. So I will hand this over to him now.
Yep. So Bali Unit for LotusScript. This is a fork of the VoltScript testing framework, which I developed and demoed at Engage last year, 2023, and it had just been open sourced then. At the same time, I did a fork to LotusScript. There are a couple of places where we're using new VoltScript language functions. One of the key ones there was we were using try-catch finally. We actually, in the VoltScript version, we've got a nested try-catch, and that was the bit that was particularly challenging to convert to on error in LotusScript. But this was ported across to LotusScript for 2 reasons. One, to prove that it can be done with any of the VoltScript. The second one, I did it in this particular case because it was pretty minimal changes. Still with doing blog posts and videos and tutorials, it's still been a few days worth of work, probably all told, but it's not a huge refactoring of the code that was required. We've got the project on the OpenNTF website. There is nothing to actually download there. For the download process, This is just timed out. Let me just reload. So on the download page, I had to upload a file there. So there is a blank.txt, which basically says, go and download it from GitHub. So to get to that, there's a nice easy link, as well as the link here. There's the link across to source control, which opens up the GitHub as we've got here. We've been using the VoltScript version of this for probably upwards of a couple of years now. All of our the VoltScript runtime itself, all of our VoltScript extensions, and all of the VoltScript script libraries use this, and it's integrated into the build management. One of the options for outputting content results from the test runners is to output as XML. That can then be picked up by Jenkins to automatically fail the build and highlight what tests have actually failed. Jenkins can parse that XML to tell you the tests that have failed. To get the actual code, obviously this looks quite different. There is no NSF here because it's just a script library. There's two ways to get to the code. The first is to go to the release and download this VoltScript testing.bss. Ignore the suffix there. This is basically just a text file that is LotusScript code. The other option is to go to source and VoltScript testing.bss and click on raw, and then you get the raw file that you can just Control A to select all, Control C, and paste into a script library. The other thing that we have there, back from the home page, we've got the link off to the documentation. This is again the whole project is a fork of VoltScript testing. The documentation is a fork and with some modifications, which is why we're a number of commits ahead. The commits behind have been manually ported across because it's mainly class name changes, and the VoltScript version actually has some different, it's a .vss file, but there's no significant differences, and certainly no differences in the functionality. The key thing to come across to here is on tutorials, as well as the how-to guides, the topic guides, and the references that you would expect from the VoltScript stuff. On the tutorials, as well as the normal one for running VoltScript code, we've also got one for Engage demo for unit testing and validation, and those are the two aspects that I wanted to pick up on in this demo. So I'll come across to Domino Designer. Here we've got that VoltScript testing in a script library, as you would expect, just copied and pasted in. And the first demo that I'm going to show of the unit testing is testing this person class. So it's testing a LotusScript class. It's got normal getters and setters. The only difference here is that the gender setter has some validation in it. So what that means is that when we write the tests are run from the initialize, it's an agent. You create a test runner. A test runner has one or more test suites in it. This is standard JUnit syntax or structure. And the test suites it creates a test suite that's added to the test runner, and then you start writing the tests, the assertions. The syntax here, JUnit can use annotations because Java can use reflection. That's not an option in LotusScript. So the syntax is quite similar to what you would have also in JavaScript with something like Jasmine, for example. You do test suite.describe and give your test a description. So this bottom one here, we've got test gender is male. And that describe function returns the test suite itself, which allows you to chain the methods in a single line. This may be something that you're not familiar to seeing in LotusScript. It's very simple to do in LotusScript. Instead of describe being a sub, it's a function which returns the current object, returns me in the LotusScript class, which then means you can just do dot assert equals string after it. Assertions, we'll look at assert equals integer for a start. That takes an expected value and an actual value. So the expected value here is 10, and the actual value is p.age. And we've got assert equals for all various data types. We've also got assert equals numeric, which can take any numeric value. Assert equals string takes a third parameter, which is a Boolean, for whether or not you want to have case-sensitive comparison. So here we do, so we're setting that as true. We've also got assert is. This uses the type name function of the core LotusScript language. So that returns the class or the data type in uppercase. So assert equals person, and we pass in the p object, which is a person class. So type name p would return person in uppercase. We've also got some more extended functionality in test suites. So here we're doing test suite.describe and we give it a description. We then run some code which shouldn't return an error but could. If we get to here, then we haven't got an error, and so we add result true. This means it passes the test. The second parameter for add result is an error message. Obviously there's no or a failure message. We're passing the test here, so we're just passing an empty string. If we did hit an error, we'd do test suite.addError, and that takes two parameters. The first one is a message, and the second one is a stack trace. There's not the ability to have a supported stack trace in LotusScript, so we're just passing the error line. That's one of the additions that we added into VoltScript. If we look at the gender validation, here we've got an example of how we're running a test where we expect it to fail. So we do an on error statement. In VoltScript, we would do this as a try catch, but an on error, we pass in an invalid gender. So at this point, it should go into the test error block. If we've got to here, then that hasn't errored, and actually we want to then add a fail on the test, and the message is setting gender to MAIL should error. If it did hit the error, which is what we would expect, Then we pass the test and we resume on other checks. So that's an example of how you can do testing to test for errors. So then we can run that agent. We get some summary message down here of 8 tests, 0 errors, 0 failures, 0 missing assertions. That may be where you're doing a describe, but you haven't then got an assertion that follows it. Where do those get written out to? So that's in the data directory. Let me just go there. On my personal laptop, I'm still on Notes 12. So it's in your program directory for Notes. Here we're running it, and it puts it in the unit test reports directory. And here's our test as HTML. And we can see that that's all run successfully. So what about if you want to, or one of the things that I realized when I then was writing our dependency management for VoltScript and wanting to validate a JSON object was that a test suite that doesn't output a report is basically unit testing, is basically validation. And that's what this allowed me to do. So in my query save here, I'm creating a test suite. I'm not using a test runner because it's just a single test suite. I'm telling it to suppress the report, and then I'm writing some tests and validating that the age is not equal to blank, so it has actually been set. And if validate age, then I'm doing some additional checks. And then I'm setting continue to test suite.ran successfully. If the test suite had any failures or errors, then it wouldn't have run successfully. So query save will then fail. If continue is false, then I'm iterating through the test results, looking for any test where the outcome wasn't passed, and outputting the description. So what that means, if we come across to notes, is I can create that person and I can save that document, and we've got some simple, useful information of what the user needs to do to fix the problem. So let's try it with -10 in there. And now it's saying check age is greater than 0. Okay. Let's get smart and say 1,000. Now check age is less than 110. Okay, let's go for 100. And now it's successfully saved, and we've got that document there. So that's using the unit testing then also for validation. If I want to, if I add another field or I have some other validation that I need to do, next time that I do that, then all I just need to do is add a new test to the test suite. And that's the only change that I need to make. So it means that your validation in your query save starts to become very lean, and it becomes much easier to extend your validation. However, I can't now unit test that person document. I need to refactor the code in order to make it testable. And to do that, that's what I've done in the validate.script library. So I've basically taken the validation part and put it into a separate script library function that takes in a test suite and takes in a document to validate against. And I've also split out the error messages part. You'll see why I've done that in a moment, because that means, because when I'm testing, writing my unit tests, so I'm testing an empty document, for example, I don't want to throw up that message box. I just want the validation to run. So I create a mock test suite, and I create an actual test suite. The actual test suite is my unit testing. The mock test suite is what I'm passing into the validate doc function. And this is then being used to run all of those tests. At the end, then I can test that my mock suite didn't run successfully, because it shouldn't for an empty document. Test that there were no missing assertions, because I've messed up my validation if I've got that. Test that there were 4 failures, which is what I expect, and test that each have failed. Testing success, then test that there were no missing assertions, no failures, and that every test passed. There's more than 4 here because the age test has run, so it's come into this if block, so there's now 7 to test. And I can do testing on age validation, so throw in a -10 in there. Was the only test that failed the age minimum? Throw in 150. Was the only test that failed the maximum? Throw in a 10.5. Was the only test that failed a whole number? And now I've got a unit test which tests this person form, this person document getting created in memory, and tests all the various scenarios in unit testing. So how do I then change the person document, its query save? Well, I just create the test suite here and call validate person doc, passing in the test suite and the current document. Continue equals test suite.run successfully as before, and if not continue, then this is where I call that get error message, which I can reuse for validation on any form. So it makes my query save very lean. It means that if I add other fields and I want to make any validation, I only need to change the script library. I don't need to touch the query save at all. And as we see, if I do a create person new, it works exactly the same. And that's saved successfully. So that's everything from me.
Very nice. I like the reusing the logic for complex form validation. It's very clever.
Yep.
All right, and then our final guest presenter will be Alec, talking about the SDKs for Drappy, the Domino REST API. So I will make you presenter, and then you should be good to go.
Yep, so hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, so hello everyone. My name is Alec from HCL Software Domino REST API team, and today I will be talking about the Domino REST API SDKs. So the developers that are responsible for these projects are Stefan Wiesel, Emmanuel Ryan Gamlanga, Alec Vincent Bardiano, and Patrick Mark Mazo. So yeah, we're going to jump right in. Um, so So first off, what are SDKs? So the textbook definition of SDKs are, so to speak, I've taken the liberty to have a Google search of it. So this is a set of tools for third-party developers to use in producing applications using a particular framework or platform. So for the Domino REST API, we currently support Node.js, which is also JavaScript or TypeScript, as well as Golang. But we also plan for Java. But we have yet figured out what HTTP client to use. So it can be Java 9, Apache, Spring, or Vertex. But it's all rough plan or rough sketch yet. As for the other programming languages, we really welcome volunteers who would want to code in Rust, Swift, C Sharp, and Erlang. So, moving on. So, the Draby Node.js SDK. So, the prerequisite are Node version 8 or greater. This is a requirement because Node SDK, the Drappy Node SDK uses the JavaScript native method called fetch under the hood. So it's only available on Node version 18 or greater. As for the installation, you just have to run this npm install at HCL software / domino rest SDK node. This is just the npm package for it. So if you want to initialize a new project, first off, you will run npm init. This will produce a package.json, and after that, you're going to run npm install um, the at HCL software, this line right here, which will then create the node underscore modules that which points to all of the dependencies. So um, after that, you can import it accordingly to your code, and you can run the code by invoking the node space the file name for that. So yeah, so the overview. So there are 4 parts in the Node SDK. So Domino Access, this is a class that facilitates your access to the Drapi server. So it will also require the developer who would use it to specify what type of authentication will it use. So it may be, as of now, it may be a basic or OAuth. Uh, uh, it will also require you to specify the scope, the base URL for the Drapi server, and the username and password. So the second part is the Domino server. It's a class that gets information on what APIs are available in your current server. So the next one, Domino connector. This is the class that does the actual communication between the Drapi Node SDK and your Drapi server. So this will require the developer to specify which API in the Domino server we want to use. So as of now, we have the basis operations, the PIM operations, setup operations, and the admin operations. So the Domino user session, this is the class that takes in both Domino access and connector and forms a session wherein a user can access the generic Drapi operations. So this is also the class that have the request method, which then calls the actual API call from towards to Drapi. So it has 2 special sessions. So as of now, we have Domino basis session. This is pretty much the session for basis operations. Also for the Domino setup session, it will just point then to the setup operations. Okay, so moving on. So this is just an illustration for us to better understand the moving parts inside the Node SDK. The Go SDK also follows the same principle or the same illustration. So in this case, Domino access. So 1 instance per user. So after that, you will then have a connector. So you need to specify which operations would you want to do. For example, if you want to do a create document, it will be under the basis connector. Uh, so the third part is the Domino server, which is just the Graphi server, which the API will go to. And the last thing is the one of the really where the magic uh, happens. So as you can see here, the Domino user session, it has the request method. So all of the built-in methods inside the SDK will just then call this Domino user session request method. So yeah, that uh, is it. Moving on, this is just a code for the sample project. I can do a quick demo just to see and explain the moving parts. So first off, I've taken the liberty to do the npm init and npm install. So as you can see here in the directory, I already have the index.js and the node modules and the package.json. So to start, we need to just import the Drapi SDK that we recently installed from the npm install. So this is how you do it. So import Drapi SDK, and so in here we've just initialized a function that we will call later, just to see if all of them are working. So this is just a start function. So inside the start function, we have here the credentials. So it is also your discretion if you want this to be in environment, but for demo purposes, um, I just initialized the credentials here. So I've also have a running Drapi server, which is just a local host that is pointing to that server, as well as the credentials for it. So in here, I've uh, selected the basic, and the scope is $sign data, which is everything, every database inside that server, and the username password. So this is just how easy it is to create a domino access. It's a one-liner, so using these credentials, you pass those as a parameter to this Drapi.sdk that domino access. So in here, you have already initialized your domino access. As for the second line, this domino server, so we get the server using this URL right here. So there, just like that, you already have a domino server that you can use inside the SDK. And this is the special type of user session, which is just a domino basis session, wherein it will point to the basis operations. So we just need to get that using both the domino access and the domino server, so that this is the object or class that will that is responsible for us to call uh, the create document or other built-in methods. So you need this object. So this is just a sample document. So um, this is just a JSON of the document. Also for these options, since create, we want to use it. We want to use the create document API. It has a rich text as parameter. So we just initialize it using these options and pass it as a parameter here. So the call will be domino basis session that create document, the data source, um, or the scope. Then the second parameter will be the document that we want to create, and then the options. So uh, just to show the demo. So I will invoke node index.js, which is the name for this file. So as you can see, we just console log the output. So this is pretty much the return of the API call. So yeah, going back to my slide. So yeah, so for the current built-in methods for Drapi are these ones. So for basis and for setup. You may also refer to our documentation or our README for more information. So if we don't have a built-in method, you can use this one. So as I've said earlier, the Domino user session have a request method, which is a generic method for you to call the the methods that are not available in the SDK yet. If you know the operation ID, you can use this one as a parameter. So the get document metadata is just the operation ID for this one, this endpoint. So and use it just like that. In here, we just check if the status is greater than 400. And yeah, moving along. As for the Go SDK, the installation is pretty straightforward. So you just need to follow the instructions and on how to install Go in their official website. So for the new project initialization, it's pretty much the same with Node or npm. You just go and do Go mod init, then the project name that you want. So this will just initialize a Go project. So this is just similar to npm init. So if you want to uh, use that module, if you want to use the Go SDK module, you need to also do go get the link to the Go SDK repo, which is this one. So this is will essentially download the SDK and will be loaded into the go.mod and go.sam, which are just essentially dependency manager for Go. So import it accordingly to your code, and just like that, you can use Go SDK. So this is just show the Go part or the Go SDK. So I've also have a quick demo for that. So let me just switch to my Go project. So also did I also did the Go mod init and the Go get. So that's why I already have this go.mod and go.sum here. So this is how you import the Go SDK. This alias can be anything you want it to be. So like uh, Go SDK Drapi can change that. But if you're going to use that, you need to change everything here. So um, in here, we just initialize a new config using the method from Go SDK.config. Then, sorry, uh, just, oh, sorry. So in here, we just initialize pretty much the same with the one we did with the Node SDK. So you can also do this via environment, but again, for demo purposes, we did this one. So it's pretty straightforward. So it's inside our main function. So this is how we set up the four moving parts here. So access comma error, which is just an error. This is because config.domino access will can return two or more two values, which is it may be an error or the actual domino access. So this is just to check if the domino access is was created or instantiated successfully. So pretty much the same with the others. So um, in the Domino server, you just need to specify what base URL you would want to, or what Drapi server you will point it to. And again, check it here if it if it's if it returned an error, as well as for the connector, pretty much the same with Node SDK. But for here, server that get connector basis, you can also, if you want to use setup operations, you would need to change it to setup. This is for like create scope, API, create schema. Yeah. So, but for our demo for today, we're going to use create document. Check for error, and then in here, it's already we have already created the Domino user session. So user session needs the access and connector. So for us to be able to create a session and um, call the call this one, and for the succeeding code, we're just initializing the data that we will put into our request body. So um, options here are just the parameters. So the actual API call is session that create document. Pretty much the same with the Node SDK. Data source, the data that we will put into the request body. This right here is a pointer. So same with C. Pointer again for the parameter. So yeah, just to run this quick. Yeah, so again, we just printed it. We used the FMT for printing. So it has a method called println, which is a standard library in Go. So yeah, going back to my slide, I just discussed this everything. So the current built-in methods for Node is for Go SDK is pretty much the same with Node. So that's it for me. For more information, again, feel free to jump into our repo, which are open sourced. So this is for Domino REST SDK node, and this one for Go. So yeah, that's it for me.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It's neat seeing Drappy used and sort of just outside just the VoltMX area, because it is, kind of like how JNX is its own layer below Drappy. Drappy is its own layer below VoltMX. And it's neat seeing that stuff expand out into other languages. So we have a few minutes left. I'm going to do a real whirlwind on my other project grab bag. So this is, whenever I make presentations, I like to leave a couple sections that I can expand or contract for time, and I'm contracting this one. These are various projects that I really should have their own blog. They should really have their own blog posts and own videos. So one is Domino JNX. I mentioned this a couple times now. This is a evolutionary lineage with Domino JNA. It has its own purposes. And like I use it now in my NSF file system project, but I'd likely use it for a couple. So this is similar to JNA. It's a similar idea. Where it's kind of like a modern API for Java for Domino. So running in Notes for Domino, and you have things like these view queries. I just wanted to pick something that looked pretty, so I picked one that uses view queries, which are much, much nicer than using view navigators. It also has a lot of hooks for like for each and all these things. So this, at some point, I will make some nice blog posts. We'll probably have a proper webinar about this, but this is just to get a taste that this is out there. It's all open source. It is available on, it's on GitHub and HCL's software organization. Similarly, there's a neat little example that that actually also came out of Drappy, which is an example of doing a Domino add-in in Rust. So this is a native add-in that uses the Notes API, and it happens to use Rust to load up a JVM. we felt like this was actually really useful as an example for like, hey, here's a new neat way to do add-ins. Like a lot of the times you see add-ins, you think C, and C is C. C++ is what it is as well, which is awful. But in Rust, it's a very neat language. It's got a lot going for it, and this is a nice example of how you can use that, how you can call the C API and build an add-in. This is one that, again, definitely warrants its own blog post. Here, I tried to get some example of Rust. Rust is it's fiddly. It's a very strict language which is to its credit, but it's kind of like a better way to write C in a lot of ways. Finally, I'll just skip this because I wrote about this before. This is there was a new version of Execution Jakarta EE. I don't need to talk about this right now. We've already seen that. But before, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Domino open source NTF. So this happened a couple months ago now. HCL officially put open sourced their MTFs on their own open source site. The really nice thing here is that for years and years and years, people have made alternate versions of the built-in templates, but they were kind of legally gray. It's not hard to see the code for an NTF, and it's not like IBM was necessarily really clamping down on people sharing their modified version of the doc library. But there's a big difference between effectively legal and actually legal. So now they are nicely Apache licensed, which means you can do whatever you want with them, redistribute them. But if you have projects that build on top of them, you don't have to worry about license conflicts. It's nice. All right, and to our questions. I see we do have a couple in here. The first one was from me. This was from the start. It's why is GitHub not as good lately? That was partially me being snide. They've started putting out their React-based UI, and I already saw that it's like, oh, the URLs don't update properly, and it's like you could just use web pages normally. There's also just like, it's big company-itis. Like they're a part of Microsoft. They've been very, very good for a long time, but it seems like you start seeing some of the signs. That said, the nice thing about a Git repository is that it's kind of like a NSF replica in that all of your data in the Git repository is in the repository. It doesn't matter where it's hosted. So even if they turn terrible, it's easy to move. But for now, they are still very, very good. There's no reason not to use them for now. For Domino in iSeries, do you need to install Node in the OS? I think the short answer is that iSeries probably doesn't have any part in any of this, because Drappy, as far as I know, does not run on iSeries because it uses JNA, and JNA isn't on there. And so all of these SDKs would be using Drappy on the client side. So your server would be Linux or Windows, and then you would connect to that from your client running Node. So that would be another server probably. And so I think iSeries is just not in the conversation, for better or for worse, just because of kind of limitations of the infrastructure. And then the final one is, can an interface be written in Elixir? And I believe you're probably talking about the Erlang related language. One of the neat things about the Drappy SDKs and Drappy in general is that since it's an HTTP API, it publishes, like there are OpenAPI specs. And so I have done this. There's a tool called OpenAPI Generator. There are probably other tools as well that take one of these specs and then generate a basic client library for your framework of choice. So, for example, I've done it where it uses the microprofile REST client as the basis in Java, but it covers many languages. I don't know for sure whether it covers Elixir or not, but it is just a REST API. And so, worst case, you can write it yourself, but next best is get a generated client stub and then use that. And then really the one for the kind of like the premier ones that have full on SDKs, that's the nicest of all. And all right, so I see we are actually over time, and that's the end of the questions. So I would like to thank the three panelists. That was especially, I gave them very little notice, so that they did an excellent job. And so I definitely want to thank them for joining me, and I want to thank everybody in the audience for joining as well. And so we will see you next month for Kim's admin webinar. Goodbye.